Welcome to PAREV-TV. Our guest is Georgi Derluguian, Professor of Historical Sociology and International Studies at the University of New York at Abu Dhabi. Professor Derluguian, thank you for taking time out to talk to us. Let us first say how much we enjoy your comments on various interviews, which are easily accessible on YouTube. Honestly, I never thought sociology or social sciences could be so powerful and help shed light on many of our social, historical, political, and religious economic questions. Thank you for clarifying things. Thank you for sharing your opinions so bravely and intelligently. You are among the very few people I know who call a spade a spade. You just give it to us as it is. Professor Derluguian, today, just a few hours ago, I was following the arrival of Prime Minister Pashinyan in Moscow, where a trilateral meeting of leaders of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia is taking place today, January the 11th. What can we expect of this meeting, and why is it so important for Russia to unlock and develop trade, economic, and transport links in the region?
We can only guess. Let's be honest about it. I am not an insider to this. There are many people in Armenia now who are making very wild guesses. In fact, accusations. That this is something about selling out. I'm not sure that they're thinking clearly. For instance, one of the protest leaders 2 days ago said very loudly in front of the Justice Ministry of Armenia that in his view, Armenia was where Armenian soldiers stood. Which means that if you get Armenian soldiers killed, this stops being Armenia? What do you mean? So what is happening, of course, now is that Azerbaijan is in a position to stake as much as they can still try. They were frustrated in the end of this war, so let's turn the game board the other side and try to look at it from the Turkish and Azerbaijani side. They stopped taking Shushi, but not Stepanakert, and not cutting off Armenian forces in Artsakh from mainland Armenia without any incursion into Armenian territory proper so far. So they haven't destroyed the enemy forces. So in a sense, the blitzkrieg, and it was a blitzkrieg, was only half successful. Blitzkrieg, let me remind you, from World War II, is not so much about control of the territory. It's about the annihilation of enemy armies, so that there would be nobody to stand in the way of occupation later. This was only partially achieved in the attack in October last year. And we can, again, only speculate what kind of arguments could President Putin use to convince Azerbaijan to stop their offensive. It had to be a very powerful argument.
World leaders speak of political solution to the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. What is a political situation that is realistic?
Well, several days ago, after what now is called almost unanimously insurrection in Washington, D.C., in the capital, there were many invitations, gloating comments from around the world, inviting the sides of American conflict to sit down and calmly discuss a political solution to their problem, to get mutual understanding and so forth. When world leaders speak about political solution, this usually means that they're trying not to touch the problem. because it's touching a problem requires expenditure of political and actual capital. So the Russian armed forces are now in Artsakh. It cost money. They were flown there by military transports, by airplanes. And then they had to drive all the way from Armenia because they were landing, so we heard all these airplanes, incessantly, So in a sense, Armenia turned into something like Aleppo, so I hope without such destruction, but we heard the Russian airplanes landing one after another. Russian fighter jets were constantly over the heads. And then huge columns of heavy equipment, went several hundred kilometers still further, to Stepanakert. It must have cost a fortune. But Russia was willing to do this, because it is apparently not just their calculation. Let's be precise about it. When people speak about Russian policymakers, there is one, and we know his name. There could be questions, why did he procrastinate, so what was happening in the first several weeks of the war? But apparently something very serious was happening, much more serious, than many people here in Armenia imagine. I suspect, to put it bluntly, that phone calls from Moscow were not being answered. It's very unusual, right? And then in the very end, I remind you, that Russian military helicopter was mistakenly shot down over the Armenian territory by a missile fired from Nakhichevan enclave, or exclave, speaking technically about it, exclave of Azerbaijan. That could not be a mistake. It was in the end of the day, it was just shortly after daylight, there was a huge slow-moving military column on the ground moving there. That could not be a mistake. And several days ago, so what I always urge my own students, to notice something which might be odd in the news and which disappears very soon. Also notice what is not being in the news suddenly. So there are two such instances that I would like to draw your attention. First, the Russian state prosecution requalified the charges, the criminal charges in the investigation of the downing of this airplane on November 9th. So it was negligence during performance of air something traffic, which carries in Russia the sentence of up to 7 years in prison and fine. It was requalified to premeditated murder of 2 or more people, which is life in prison. Why would they do this? Azerbaijan had apologized and they promised to find the culprits. So for some reason, Russia sent another signal there. The second notice, that we stopped hearing about Syrian jihadists. Why is that? Were they all brought back to Syria? What happened? So I'm quite certain that a lot is going on right now, a lot of which is not being discussed in the Armenian public sphere or in the internet, which is extremely narrow. It's about removing Nikol Pashinyan, just how incompetent was Nikol Pashinyan, and basically nothing else. There is no evidence, that any other government would be more competent in their place. And my question simply would be, what is the leeway of any other government at the moment? What could they conceivably do? So that's where we are. What's happening in Moscow is Russia playing against Azerbaijan.
There is so much discussed and so much written about this issue, but I like to bring up what many serious observers believe, and they believe that Putin's focus is on restoring the geographical integrity and honor of the Russian state. They believe Putin aims to establish a new kind of union comprised of the former Soviet republics headed by Russia on the same territory as the USSR, with economic ties or security ties. What do you think of this grand plan of Putin? Because it does make sense to me.
It doesn't. I'm sorry. That would be a great noble goal. However, Putin is sober enough to realize that this is impossible. Long ago, it was now long dead General Lebed, was the previous extremely popular in the late 1990s, kind of populistic leader, who many people thought, would be the next restoration leader of Russia. By the way, in the 1990s, in the times of Boris Yeltsin, it was quite clear to any serious observer that the next leader of Russia would be a man in uniform. And that Russia will try to restore its position in the world. So General Lebed famously said that those who do not feel sorry for the Soviet Union have no heart, and those who think that it can be restored have no brain. How could it be restored when there is war in Ukraine? Even Georgia. Look, in 2008, Georgia was defeated with difficulty, greater difficulty than many people suspect. It was actually humiliation to Russia at the time, that big Russia could at the first 3 days of the war in South Ossetia, could barely overpower the Georgian resistance. But then, of course, no NATO involvement, no help from outside was forthcoming, despite the Georgian wildest dreams. And Russia essentially became the master of Georgia. There were Russian troops freely moving anywhere around, and yet they did not occupy Georgia. Why is that? Because the cost of occupation could be great. Look at American attempts in Iraq. So the initial defeat of enemy organized resistance is much easier than maintaining your presence for years ahead against a potentially hostile population. So Moscow already in 2008, recognized that. And of course, Moscow in 2008 was still hoping, and Putin personally was hoping, to be part of the Western alliance. Only when it became very clear, that the West was not prepared to welcome Russia into the alliance, that only smaller countries, Bulgaria, or Estonia, yes, they could probably digest them in European Union, not Russia.
Yeah, I'm sorry, continue. I'm sorry.
No, and this is why, I don't think, that Putin is trying to restore the territory of the Soviet Union. However, his program, there are two goals that, again, you can read between the lines in his pronouncements. He's very afraid of allowing a repetition of Soviet collapse. Right. So he has a much more conservative program. Not again, no more democratization, which leads to the collapse of superpower, and no more ethnic conflict. This is why I suspect, this is just my suspicion, my hypothesis, he has mentioned Sumgait pogroms 3 times in the last couple of months. There was no need for him to do that, but clearly he sees a connection between the pogroms in Azerbaijan against Armenians in the late 1980s and then unwinding of ethnic conflicts along the southern tier of Soviet Union. And his second big goal is to restore respect of Russia as at least a military power on the game board. And this is why he cannot afford to be friendly to the United States. The only way, that Russia matters, and because it doesn't matter very much economically to the West, so it can matter only as a potential threat. So he always says that, that we have nuclear weapons. We still do, in huge quantities. So Russia can have only one hope, to survive, this negative period. And then we shall see, there will be probably another attempt at modernization in Russia itself.
When we come to speak about Armenia, Armenia has a very strong relationship with Russia, maybe not relationship as much as it's given into Russia, whether it's military bases, whether it's energy deals, whatever. Azerbaijan, on the other hand, belongs to a group called the Rejectionist. It, with Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, are more not interested in getting close to Russia. But my question to you is, in the long run, can Azerbaijan afford to maintain a non-aligned position?
No, of course not. Azerbaijan is already a satellite of several powers. So this is going to be quite interesting, to put it mildly, to watch the fortunes of Azerbaijan in the coming years. Because Azerbaijan is now involved, because of this war in Karabakh. It is very much on the radar screen of Israel and Iran at the same time. Turkey, so as a Russian observer put it, that Baku is now between Caesars of Russia and Turkey, which are not friendly at all. So what happened, let me remind you, what happened in the late 1980s, democratization and perestroika proclaimed by Mikhail Gorbachev, that the leaders of Soviet republics saw opportunity to become leaders of independent states. So you were yesterday a provincial secretary of Communist Party of Turkmenistan appointed from Moscow. And now you are essentially owner of your country. You are represented in the United Nations. You are sovereign. You call yourself now Turkmenbashi, not just a president, but the leader of all the Turkmen. And you own a lot of gas, and you become instant billionaire. And the best way of protecting your riches is through having your sovereign army and police and secret apparatus. Let me remind you again, that the father of Ilham Aliyev, for many years, has been a loyal serviceman of the Soviet Union. He was a KGB general. He had started his career in the late 1930s in the Transcaucasus, which means that he was within the patronage network of Lavrenti Beria and such people. In order to become lieutenant general in KGB by the late 1960s, he would have to, we don't know actually, what was he doing in the 40s and the 50s. And he was certainly close to the head of KGB in the Brezhnev period, Yuri Andropov, the reformer. And that's how he came to power. He was a magnificent politician for his part of the world. When I say magnificent, not in a democratic sense. This was the man who really understood the workings of power in his corner of the world. He was an excellent manipulator, and he deserved his nickname, the Dragon. The Dragon. His son has, sons always have difficulty, living up to their fathers and to their legacies, because the son was a golden child of a first secretary of a Soviet republic, fabulously wealthy, from probably his childhood. He probably never, had to go through any of the experiences that brought his father to power, but he had inherited a well-oiled machine of family control over the Caspian energy reserves. So let me remind you, just how important are those, that originally in the late 19th century, together with Pennsylvania oil, this was the second biggest source of oil in the world market. So one source was, of Pennsylvania, which gave us John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. The other source was Baku, 50%, almost 50%. There were times when Saudi Arabia got its kerosene from Baku. And those were the Nobel brothers, the same family as the Nobel Prize, the Rothschilds, and also, great Armenian entrepreneurs like Montashev, like Kaluz Gulbenkian, and so forth. So, and by the way, also, not by chance, Baku was also the hotbed of revolutionary activity. So Stalin really started his revolutionary career in Baku oil before 1917. Of course, you know about Suren Spandaryan and Shaumyan and many others. Yeah. So the problem was that you get that oil, you control Azerbaijan through your family and friends, a so-called clan. This was done. They were mostly men from the, and a few women, who personally were close to Heydar Aliyev, but they have been aging inevitably, because those people have been recruited back in the 1970s. The last of them surviving today are octogenarian. And so I don't believe for a second that Heydar Aliyev left power to his son. He left it, to the court around his son. But the court has been changing, it has been a long time, and there is a whole country around that oil rig. What do you do with the whole country? So good, you proclaim it independent and very neutral, because you're afraid, that Moscow has still too much influence. Let me remind you, there are officially 2 million Azerbaijanis in Russia. There are probably many more. Some of the, and they're everywhere, you go in the bazaar anywhere in the middle of Russia, there will be Azeris. The bazaar niches are very tightly occupied by Azerbaijanis or mountain Jews from Azerbaijan, and all the way to several billionaires. One of the prominent Russian oil companies, Lukoil, is run by ethnic Azerbaijanis. So should you be afraid or not, that someday, some prominent Azerbaijani from Moscow would be dispatched as a new president? So of course, you want to maintain neutrality. You play the game of being between several different centers of power, but then you still have your own population, and that population was very upset, that Armenians controlled 7 districts around Artsakh and Artsakh itself. Azerbaijanis felt humiliated, and you have to play somehow, to those sentiments of the population, because that colored revolutions or something, like Arab Spring revolts, they do happen. So Azerbaijan, before this war, looked already dangerously like Shah's Iran in the 1970s. It's oil-rich, but the population is relatively poor, and there are many people who are very upset about the situation in the country.
Each of these republics have their own problems, but let me go back to Armenia and look into the future. As you very well know, Armenia is also found between these scissors, as you mentioned. 80% of Armenia's borders are locked, are closed between Turkey and Azerbaijan. What is open is 20% Georgia and Iran. How long can this last, and what can the future hold for us in terms of opening borders in the area?
Let me go back, to those Russian cargo planes. It's quite obvious. So the result of the war was quite spectacular. So it was vertiginous. In the beginning, it looked like Armenians would hold their ground. So for the first couple of weeks, and actually, let me remind you, that there were border clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan proper, not in Karabakh, last July, and Azerbaijan lost a general in those border clashes, and several officers. So it was experienced as humiliation, and there was a riot. In Baku, many people suspected that, of course, in Baku, nothing happens by chance. But what if that was a failure of police control? These things happen in such regimes, so they're quite brittle. Sultanistic regimes look formidable until the moment they start collapsing. They're brittle from inside, because loyalty in such regimes is bought with perks, and it's solidified with the threat of repression. There is nothing else. There are carrots and sticks in these regimes. There could be no other familial loyalty. That's why, you have to rely on your relatives, but there are always many more relatives than there are carrots. So relatives sometimes are the most dangerous enemies, exactly in these kind of regimes. So Azerbaijan was, in a sense, cornered. They had to unleash the war. For many years, the advisors of Ilham Aliyev have been trying to avoid any action on Artsakh. Because if they move and lose, that would probably spell the end of their regime. But if they move and win, this kind of regime cannot afford to have glorious generals and heroic soldiers. Notice, but to this day, we really don't have a parade of great identifiable heroes on the Azerbaijani side.
Interesting.
Right? Notice this, so it's all Ilham Aliyev, and he speaks in first singular. I ended the status quo. So he speaks like an Oriental king of old. Now, what Moscow really wants, and where they forced him, I don't know how, we still don't know how, they forced him to accept peacekeepers, which essentially means a military garrison in the territory which Azerbaijan considers its own, besides the Turks. So unlike Armenia, Armenia is not between the Caesars. Armenia has only the Russians. Azerbaijan actually has Russians and Turks. And let me remind you, we don't know in what capacity and how many Israelis, but Israelis are there as well. At the border with Iran and Islamic Republic, you can imagine, is not exactly overjoyed over this. So what Moscow is trying to achieve, and it was clear from the first moment, they tried to reopen the railroads, which would bind Azerbaijan. Armenia is already there. So it's very much like in anywhere in politics, so in United States elections, you really don't care much about your solid base of support because they're your base of support. You care about the so-called independents, those who are somewhere in the middle, So Azerbaijan is somewhere in the middle. So it's very clear that Armenia is pro-Russian. It will have to be. Georgia is anti-Russian. It's also very clear, although I'm not sure that this will last, because Georgia is also in a difficult situation. Azerbaijan is somewhere independent, as you mentioned it, trying to play different games. So the way to pull in Azerbaijan is to reopen the old, not even Soviet era, it was still Russian imperial era, 19th century railroads, to reopen the rail link to Armenia, to supply the Russian garrison in the first place. And it remains to be seen how it will play out. So probably this is what is being discussed in Moscow right now, today.
Yeah, as I said, I've heard you on different videos and different interviews, and at one place you had mentioned that the whole region is losing the golden hands, and the golden hands are being replaced by golden teeth. I loved it. I never heard that expression before. And I think there were quite a few Armenians in Azerbaijan, close to 500,000. And we had an Armenian community in Lebanon. We had an Armenian community in Turkey. And maybe I'm kind of distancing myself from Armenia, but my question to you is, we are coming up with a new diaspora. When you look at the Armenian diaspora, we have Armenians throughout major cities in the world. How organized is it? Because one person said, the diaspora we have today belongs to the 19th and 20th century, and we have to reorganize, redesign the diaspora. Any comments about that?
That war was a blessing in disguise, if you wish, because it came close to genocide. Let's face it. the Turks, it was a very big mistake, to get Erdogan involved. But of course, Baku was desperate. And then, look what is happening now. So why stage? I actually recommend, watching on YouTube the military parade, the victory parade in Baku, gloating there, and prominently mentioning Enver Pasha. So proclaiming themselves essentially the inheritors of genocide. Mm-hmm. Right, and that there are instances during the war, when genocide was openly mentioned, that this is the way to go, this is the only way we can deal with Armenians. So this mobilized actually Armenians. So another joke that you probably heard I used was that, what do I have in common with Kim Kardashian? Not much really, except that we are both Armenians. We are both Armenian diaspora. I have many more friends now than before the war, because the war, a military officer came to me and said, "Professor, thank you for standing with us during these days." Very seriously, They were Armenian startup developers. These guys, were making good money, still they don't really, because they are post everything, they're postmodern and post-industrial, they really don't need a railroad. They're making money beside it. But then, during the war, they began developing anti-drone weapons, the new kind of defenses. At the same time, there are other groups, but overlapping groups, developing medical equipment, exoskeletons, for the wounded, bringing people back from the dead. And they're very proud, that they do it at a fraction of a cost of what even the Chinese produced equipment costs now. Because everyone is sharing. So here there was sort of a war communism. So do you have this kind of spare parts? Of course. Do you have the knowledge? Of course. Do you know on which market, can I get that? Of course. We are together in this. So we will need to cherish that feeling. We need to realize also that diaspora used to be in the places where there were surviving Armenians outside the small republic of Soviet Armenia. And those were the Lebanon, primarily France, the United States. Now there are many more. With the collapse of Soviet Union, you have to consider a diaspora also in Kazakhstan, in Russia itself. Right, and it's big. It's very big. It's very involved. The question, however, is how to bring them for more than just visits. Mm-hmm. So what could they do? So one possibility, we try to be inventive about it. We have to create reasons for the people to come and stay. Golden hands, but what are they going to do with those golden hands? Sure. Right, there is. Consider this reason, so it was suggested by a very I'm not going to name names, but very high-ranking economist in Moscow, who happens to be part Armenian. Again, a big question, part Armenian, what does it mean? For instance, if you mechanically count it, I am only 1/4 Armenian. So because my father, I never had a choice of my father's choices. My father did not marry an Armenian girl. My grandfather already did not marry an Armenian. He married a Don Cossack. So what makes us Armenian, and to what extent? All right, so we have to realize, that not only Armenians have place in the Republic of Armenia. We need all capable people who are willing to come and do something. And that something could be anything, from bringing your children to study at school. So we need to completely revamp the school system. And that Armenian friend of mine in Moscow said that, guys, you don't realize your advantages. Essentially, you are now a province of Russian Federation, but you are not under any international sanctions. And you have this, incredible array of contacts around the world. You are trying, of course, you tried to build a very national state in the 1990s. Where did it leave you? So now you have technological universities where the instruction is in very good classical Armenian. But where do you get the textbooks? And where do you go there? So why not? And can you really compete with MIT or MFTI, the Russian equivalent of that? You probably not. However, you can create schools which bring the kids, to that level, and we have such kids, So I have instructed school children, who are now at Harvard, University of Chicago, who are now at Moscow, So we have to concentrate on our strengths. So the strengths are probably in school education, and we have a lot of unemployed or underemployed, underpaid people who could be wonderful teachers. They probably never been before, but they could be wonderful teachers. Instruction will have to be at least in 3 languages. So Armenians are doomed to know 3 languages, English, Russian, and Armenian, and probably more, probably others.
Maybe I'm taking you further into the diaspora Armenian concerns and community, but in our communities, there are a couple or quite a few topics which keep recurring. And one of them is the relationship between diaspora and Armenia. That's a very important issue. The other one is assimilation. What do we do with the youth? Where are we getting to? And the third one, obviously, is the question of genocide. My question is, again, a professor said that when Armenia looks at the diaspora, it usually deals with 7 bodies, 3 political parties, 2 churches, and HBU and AMAA. Do these organizations represent the diaspora?
I think things will be changing, and they're already changing rapidly with the internet and with these new younger generations. Much of it, I would really leave it to their own devices. It's a great historical principle. It happened on its own. Under the right conditions, it just happens on its own. As a sociologist, I know there is interesting data by some of my colleagues about the maintenance of indigenous languages. So we have examples when governments put enormous effort into preserving languages, forcing people to learn languages at school. So Tatarstan within Russian Federation, Cornish language in Wales, or Irish, Gaelic in Ireland. We have also examples when governments put a lot of effort into banning languages. So Turkey, of course, and the Kurds is one big example, but also Franco, in Spain, when officially the Basque and the Catalan languages were banned there. What difference does it make? None. None whatsoever. So if you try to ban a language and people continue speaking it within families, or there is something, prestige of speaking this language to each other, it will continue. If there is no prestige to the language, you don't need it, it's a drag, it's something that you are forced to learn in school, it won't. It has to be cool to do something Armenian, to visit Armenia. It's probably not necessary for everyone to master the language. I know that this is sacrilegious, to many people, but consider Irish. Consider the Irish, or Greeks for that matter. How many Greek Americans actually can read and write Greek? Nevertheless, something keeps them Greek and something keeps the others Irish. So you have to think about it, what would just make it cool, to be Armenian? Because there is rock band like System of a Down? It could be. And I don't think, do they ever play at AGBU events? hardly ever in the churches. Right, so that's what would bring a lot of youth to your events, but you're not going. So AGBU probably, my imagination, which is probably limited, is mostly operating like in the 1930s. So it's a dance, very formal dance usually, or it's people cooking together and playing tavla, backgammon, nardi, somewhere. So I think much of it will be about kind of rebranding Armenia as a cool place to visit. It's a great culture. It's very interesting culture, right? So it's quirky alphabet, so there are things, that could be done about it. And there are great Armenian musicians, designers. Let me stress it. Great Russian poet and literary critic Dmitry Bykov today said that, Nikolai Gogol, the dead souls, that Nikolai Gogol, the classical writer from the 19th century, he's responsible for inventing two nations, not one, but two, Russians and Ukrainians, because much of Ukrainian self-image is coming from Taras Bulba. It's also Gogol, if you ever heard about such a novel. Nations are invented by poets, writers, filmmakers, by sculptors, architects. Would there ever be an Armenia without Alexander Tamanyan and the way he built the town here, the way he built Yerevan? Right? Think about it. It doesn't take very many, but it is a concerted effort. And would there ever be great Soviet Armenia in the 1960s without Martyros Saryan living here, without Aram Khachaturian, occasionally coming, without the Burakan Astrophysics Observatory? So it's not only about archaeologists. So it's actually very important to support intelligentsia and creativity, both in diaspora and very different kinds of creativity. It may look to you maybe wacky sometimes, because this is modern art. But I don't know who is doing the animation with the great monument, the stone heads outside Stepanakert, Menk Evmel Sarer, so our mountains, which are popularly known simply as grandfather and grandma, Baba, Deda. Mm-hmm. 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 So somebody did animation. What if they could walk? How would they speak? And it's great. This is something to be saluted.
Professor Derluguian, I knew it was going to be a very interesting discussion, talking to you, and enlightening, really. You have dedicated your life to books and to teaching, and you have been touching lives, young lives especially. You are well aware of the new generation, what they're interested in, what they think, and how they change. What is your message to the young Armenian Americans? I specifically want you to think of American Armenians. As I said, we are very concerned with the young generation. What is your message to them?
That's in a global world, it's going to be boring to be like everyone. You have to be somewhat special. Armenian is a good way of being special.
Beautiful.
And how you define it does not really depend necessarily on the elder generation, on the church, or the institutions of the traditional parties. Be inventive about it. So what do you think is cool, is fun? And when you get together, virtually or in person, it will come to you. Because it's cool. It's great, being Armenian. It is scary because we're a small nation, and small nations know that they can disappear better than any other big nation. However, I think if we all do everything standard, if we all watch the same movies, play the same games, very soon you will discover that life is becoming rather meaningless. And the meaning of life is largely in traditions. And traditions, I have a very simple definition, sociological definition. It's actually a very, very scientific definition of tradition, something which people have done for more than twice with pleasure, becomes a tradition. So do something, if it goes well, do it again, and then it will become a tradition. Good luck to you, have fun.
You're the best we have. You're really, really inspiring, and you're always optimistic.
Well, for a long time, I was not considered an Armenian. It was quite interesting, because there are so many people, whose father and mother are real Armenians. They speak the language, they wave the flag, and they eat dolma each Sunday.
And drive black cars.
Yes, Prof. If they can afford it.
I thank you. I really thank you. I don't know what else to say. We hope to see you in New York area sometime soon. Maybe you can give a lecture and be with us, because you're really a valuable member of the Armenian nation, people. We really treasure you. Thank you very much.
Thank you much. Goodbye.
Enjoy the day. Thank you very much. Okay.